I always ask myself the question, what would have happened if the tree in the middle of the garden was never brought to the attention of Adam and Eve, if they were never instructed not to touch the fruit? What would have happened? There's a part of me that feels that maybe the desire may never have been ignited. There is something in each and every one of us um, that longs for adventure. And in most cases, when men pursue women outside of a committed relationship, sometimes it's just the chase. It's not that we want to conquer, it's just that we like the art of chasing. Sometimes it's that we do want to conquer. However, um, I have found that one of the ways to disable a man's um, tendency and desire to act in a way different to what he promised is to have a conversation with him in advance and come to terms with what I call conditions. I'm going to say this, perhaps not, this is not for today's session, but let me say this anyway. This means if you're going to deal with infidelity, there should be rules. Rule number one, I expect you not to cheat because I believe you're a man of principle. However, I want you to know that if something should happen, I'd like you to consider how I would feel. But nonetheless, here are some conditions. Number one, you can't have more than one girlfriend outside of our relationship, if that ever happens. Number two, she cannot be in the same city as myself. Number three, you cannot see her more than twice a month. Number four, you cannot spend the family's resources on her without my approval. And number five, I need to know who she is. Ladies, if you're listening, what I've just said, cognitively, would be challenging to accept. But if you think about it rationally, what you've done is you've put the man in a box. You've set the parameters. What that means is if he has to go through the process of doing something, the inconvenience of finding someone outside of town who he has to tell you about, who he cannot spend too much money on, makes it such that his desire for such a pursuit dwindles. That is the art of negotiation. Now, that doesn't mean you say that in the first instance when you start to date someone, but I'm saying your ability to negotiate should be more superior than a younger woman's. Number two, the willingness to learn and to apprentice. I would make a recommendation to ladies, if you can, go and study the following women. The Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba is said to have had a baby for King Solomon. Her story is quite fascinating because King Solomon was very wealthy, according to the books of antiquities. And it said that when the Queen of Sheba arrived to visit Solomon, she came with gifts. But there were no, she wasn't as wealthy as he was, so there weren't gifts that she could give him that could impress him. However, one of the things she had was the ability to ask questions. So she kept asking him intelligent questions that enabled him to talk about himself. And Solomon loved that because most people came to Solomon to ask for answers to problems, whereas she came and she was intrigued, she was curious, she was open-minded, she had the ability to talk about several subjects, and all she did was ask questions, subtle questions, and so he found her to be very interesting. Now, in order for you to be interesting, you have to be interested, and she was. Now, the second woman is Cleopatra. Now, there is a perception that Cleopatra was a very, very beautiful woman. Nothing can be further from the truth. She wasn't. She wasn't ugly, but she wasn't strikingly beautiful. She had features that were very manly, but what she did have was she was very well versed in different languages. She was very knowledgeable about different subjects. She was very creative. She was very driven, but she was also very feminine. So she could actually converse with men in a way that would make a man feel as though she was one of the gang. So you have to study Cleopatra. Marilyn Monroe, for the art of seduction, conversation, subtle gestures, dressing, femininity. She gets it all. And then number 4 is Helen of Troy. Number 2, so this goes back to number 2, which is the willingness to apprentice. So go study these women and learn. You have to learn how to be more feminine. You have to learn how to have traditional values. You have to learn how to use your voice, your pitch, the tone of your voice, body language, facial gestures, the way you touch your hair. You have to know how to have the right temperament. You have to know how to be silent. You have to learn how not to want to win the argument with a man always. As a matter of fact, one of the issues with older women is you've lived long enough that when a man speaks, you believe that you should correct him. So in many ways, your lived experience becomes a liability because you don't know when to keep your mouth shut and when to correct a man. And even more importantly, you don't know how to correct a man. So the art of timing is something that is missing with older women. Now, number 3 is your power of your words. You've heard me say this before, that in every man there is a kid and there is a king. Most men behave like kids, but the wise woman speaks to the king in the man when the kid is speaking, and he rises up from his low level to the expectation set for him by the woman. The power of your words: inspiring, peaceful, motivating, consoling, insightful. How you use your words matters with men. And number 4 is what I call the interconnection of a man's psyche. And by this, what I simply mean is physical. We live in 3 planes of understanding: mental, spiritual. Most young women focus on a man's physical, which is simply the physical act of intimacy and sex. Very few women have learned the art of mental satisfaction, the art of emotional satisfaction. How do you stimulate a man's mind? Because the same energy required for sex and for your sexual, intercourse and sexual events and sexual shenanigans is the same energy required for creativity. It just needs to be deployed in a different direction. How do you inspire a man so that his mental arousal is at its peak level when he is around you? He goes to work, he gets drained, he comes to you, he gets recharged. That is a powerful quality most women do not have. And the final is spiritual. We are spiritual beings. We live in a physical body, and we've been gifted with a mind. 3 planes of understanding, 3 levels of consciousness, 3 parts of our personality. As an older woman, you should understand how to please a man physically. Secondly, you should understand how to please a man mentally and psychically and emotionally. And then finally, you should know how to connect to him spiritually. Spiritual connection is quite easy. You have gratitude, understanding his purpose. This is where it's critical. Every man has a purpose, or every man is in pursuit of his purpose, or every man would like to know what his purpose is. So understanding how to be grateful, show love, but allow him to express his purpose or understand his purpose. And this is where the wise women win big. They try to understand the man's purpose, and they try to align the man's purpose with their purpose. The concern most men have is a woman has her vision, and he has his vision. And as the saying goes, how can two walk together except they agree? So the wise woman tries to understand the man's purpose, sees if her purpose aligns with his purpose, and she's willing to bring her purpose in line with his purpose, so that you have two people who become one. Which is the reason why most men, some men, would rather choose a woman who is less attractive, but is more aligned from a purpose perspective to what they want. And number 5 is peace. In my experience, most men, we want peace. There is nothing so unattractive as someone who is supposed to be on your side, who fights with you like the enemy. You've heard the saying, sleeping with the enemy. Sometimes it feels as though most modern women have been educated to the point where, I say this to a friend of mine, you send your children off to school and they come back as your enemies because they've been brainwashed by all these silly ideologies where they become militant about certain views to the detriment of the union. We want peace, which is why most men want silence from their women, except the woman is being inspirational, being insightful, being understanding, and speaking in a kind way. Most men do not want to come home to fights, disagreements, debates. So always ask yourself this, ladies. Do you want to be? Do you want to be right, or do you want to be in a relationship? If you can, peace is so easy. Just learn to say yes. And secondly, practice what I call delayed confrontation, where something happens, you have your own perspective, you know what you would like to say, but just say to yourself, I'll do this in 2 days. I'll wait for 2 days and I'll tell him how I feel. That achieves 2 things. Number 1, it ensures that at the heat of the moment, your emotions are not overwhelmed and you don't say words that you should not have said. But number 2, it gives you the opportunity to reconsider your position. And I'll tell you this, which should be number 3. Assuming that you were right and he was wrong, it gives him the opportunity to come back to you and apologize. Very, very powerful statement. You have to learn how to use the art of peace to grant the man the opportunity to apologize. If the man feels that he's been attacked, we do not apologize because we're naturally built for battle. So we dig in, we say, fine, I will not apologize. Well, if we're wrong and you give us peace and time, you'd be surprised at how we come back and we say, I had some time to think over what you said and what I said, and I was wrong. That process of acknowledging the fact that he was wrong starts to recondition his attitude, so that going forward, he starts to learn how to be more mature in his conversations with you. Now, these are 5 things that women can do, and I hope it helps.